Welcome back. Last time, we learned how the names of the gods were written and incidentally explored some ancient Egyptian mythology. Let's begin today by going over the homework, sentences that involve the names of the gods. The first sentence was, Isis and Hathor descend to the town. We know we begin with the verb, but which one is descend? We have ched, but that's to fare downstream, which isn't what the sentence says. It's just descend. So we use ha, which also means to go down. Now we need Isis, which is the throne, feminine T, and woman determinative. Remember, she was only called Isis by the Greeks. They added the is ending. The Egyptians called her something like ist. There's no and, so we continue with Hathor, and that's the falcon in the shrine. So now we have Isis and Hathor go down. We need to the town. By now we know that to, for places, is the mouth R. So we add that. We of course remember that town is Niwit. Everyone always remembers that word. We have a stroke because it's an ideogram and a loaf T because it's feminine. And that's it. It would have been pronounced something like Ha ist Hathor Niwit. Good. Okay, our next sentence. Nut is in the sky, and Nephthys is in her house. Our verb is you, is. That's followed by Nut. Here we have the Nupot, biliteral, plus the T, because she's feminine. That gives us the sound Nut. Beneath the two phonetic hieroglyphs is the sky determinative. She's the goddess of the sky. Now we need in the sky. In is our owl. Isn't this getting easy? Again, we have two phonetic hieroglyphs and the sky determinative pet. We have a compound sentence, so we can repeat the verb eu. Now we need to add Nephthys. There she is, with her neb sign on top of a shrine and a goddess determinative. In is the owl, and house is per. For her, we need a suffix pronoun, but which one? Yes, the folded cloth suffix pronoun s. And that's our sentence. Nut is in the sky, and Nephthys is in her house. It may have sounded something like eu nut em pet, eu nebet em peres. Our next sentence is a short one. Isis knows all plans. The verb to know is rech. Now we add Isis. All is the word neb, but it follows the noun. So we write plans first. That's secher, and we have three strokes to indicate it's a plural. Now we can add the neb sign for all. This would have sounded something like rech ist secheru neb. Good. Okay, on to our last sentence. Osiris and Isis are in this boat. Same drill. We start with the verb eu, to be, or in this case, are. Next, we add Osiris, which the ancient Egyptians pronounced Osir. Remember, the Greeks add all those is endings. Next, add Isis. And now the owl for in and depet for boat. In case you're wondering, gods can also sail in a depet, an ordinary boat, but they would need a wea, a sacred boat, to sail across the sky. Now all we need is this, which we remember follows the noun. We just have to decide which this to use, masculine or feminine. Well, boat, depet, ends in a T, so it's a feminine. Thus we use ten, the feminine form. And that's our last sentence. Eu osir ist em depet ten. Good. Now it's time for your scribe's robe. read brush and blocks of ink. We're going to learn some grammar. I would like to show you how to say no in ancient Egypt. To be more precise, it's really how to say not. You'll see. We had a peek at this much earlier in the course, when we had the word for not to know, chem. When we first saw this word, I mentioned that the arms were a determinative for the word indicating not to know. Well, the arms are actually much more. They are how the ancient Egyptians indicated negation in general. Actually, in most cases, the arms hieroglyph goes in front of the verb, and that means not. The arms hieroglyph was pronounced like our water. The arms aren't the only negation indicator. There's also the arms combined with a water sign. This may have been pronounced nun, but we don't know the vowels. Now, the question is, when do you use each of these? The answer depends on tense. Let's start with something simple. A sentence without negation. He hears. Sejm F. If we put the arms by themselves in front of the sentence, it negates it. But it makes it the past tense. He did not hear. So if we see the arms alone, it's the past. Now, I bet you have a question. Remember when we learned how to say things in the past by inserting a water sign between the verb and the subject, like this one. This is what we called the Sejm NF form of the past tense. That would be he heard, the past tense. Well, for negation in the past tense, the arms N up front does the job, and you don't need an N in the middle of the sentence. So, now we know how to negate in the past. How about the future? This is where you use the arms and the water sign. This is he shall not hear. So now we know what negation for future and past look like. How about the present? This is the surprise. Let me show it to you, then try to explain it. I really can't, but I can help you remember it. Now, let's look at this and try to figure out what's going on. It's negation in the present. The surprise is that we have the Sejm NF form of the verb, our old past tense. In front of this is the arms negator. This makes it the present tense. It translates to he does not hear. The arms alone and the past tense N give you the present negative. I said I'd try to explain it. Here goes. The idea of putting a negator in front of what you want to negate is not unique. It's used in symbolic logic, which is also a language. For example, let's say the letter P represents the sentence, Paul is tall. In symbolic logic, the tilde, the curl, is the negator. So, not P means it's not true that Paul is tall. I negated the sentence. Now, what would happen if I put two negators in front of the sentence? Not P. Well, technically, it would mean it is not true that Paul is tall. They would cancel out, and you'd get Paul is tall. What I'm saying is that it's similar with our negation in the present. We have a sentence that looks like the past because of the N, but when we put another N in front of the sentence, it cancels the past tense N, and you get the present. I know this is not a perfect explanation, but it's intended to help you remember that the two N's cancel when you have what looks like the Sejm NF past tense. It's really not that complicated. Remember, The arms by itself, past negative. Arms and water sign is the future negative. Arms plus Sejm NF form is the present negative. Let me show you some more sentences with negation and ask you to translate. That's how you'll learn. Okay, what do we have? Well, it's arms alone. No Sejm NF sentence. Must be the past negative. So let's translate. The verb is hab, to send. The scribe is sending. What is he sending? Secher pen, this plan. So we said it's the past negative because it's just the arms. So the translation would be, the scribe did not send this plan. Good. Let's keep going. Here's another one for you to translate. Well, this one looks like a Sejm NF form. But we also have the arms in front, so the arms will cancel the other N of the Sejm NF form and make it the present negative. Let's translate. Break it into words. The verb is secha, to remember. Who's remembering? There's the folded cloth after the N of the past, so it's she. What is she remembering? Well, ren is name, and it has a suffix viper attached, so it's his name. Now we have to negate it. And we said that the arms in front plus the past N makes the sentence present negative. So we have, she does not remember his name. Good. Okay, let's do one from English to hieroglyphs. Try, she will not remember his name. Future. Well, the arms and the water sign together signify the future, and we don't use the Sejm NF form for the future. So we take out our N in the middle of the sentence. That gives us nun, secha, s, ren, f. She will not remember his name. Good. Let's do a few more. Translate this one. Okay. We have the arms and water sign. What tense is it? Yes, future negative. You're getting it. What's our verb? Yes, ched, to fare downstream. Who's faring downstream? They. Sen is our suffix pronoun for they. The owl is in. So what are they in? A wea, a sacred boat. It's future tense, so it must be they shall not sail downstream in the sacred boat. Too bad for them. Let's do one more. Here we have a complex sentence. We start out with the arms. We don't see the Sejm NF form. There's an N, but not between the verb and the subject, as in the Sejm NF. So it must be past tense. The verb is dejed, say or speak. The horned viper tells us it's he who didn't say or speak. The N is probably for to, as in to a person. Yep, there's the person, the scribe. Okay, so the beginning is, he did not speak to the scribe. Now comes the arms and water sign combination. That must be future. In the second part, you can see the folded cloth suffix, s, for she, after the verb, to speak. She will not speak to his father. It's probably causal, so we could insert a so. He did not speak to the scribe, so she will not speak to his father. Good. Let me give you a few English to hieroglyphs homework sentences to practice negation on. Try, she will not go forth to the house if he does not remember the road. Another one, the man did not speak in the office of the scribe. Try, behold, It will not be good if she tells everything. A remarkable amount of ancient Egyptian inscriptions involve their belief in immortality. Tomb inscriptions are, of course, often about the next world, but so are temple inscriptions, Book of the Dead papyri, and even inscriptions found on statues. Soon, we will be translating these texts. So now is the time to look at vocabulary words that relate to immortality and life after death. Here's an important one that we will see often. This word was pronounced dejet and means eternity or everlasting. The long, thin determinative is a spit of land and also determines the word for estate, so it may mean a realm of eternity. A word that we've seen before is ma'eh. It means true or just. Often it's just pronounced ma'at. We all do that. It's often combined with another word for a different and very important meaning. The other word is cheru. The only sign in the word that you haven't seen is the third hieroglyph. It's an or. It is a triliteral representing the sounds ch, and u. So what we have is the triliteral surrounded by three phonetic complements: the ch, placenta, the r, mouth, before it, and the quailchick u follows it. So the word was pronounced cheru, and it means voice. Now, sometimes the word was simply written as the or by itself. Now, I mentioned that these two words can be combined to make something completely different. The new meaning involves religion. Let me explain. It was believed that before the deceased was permitted to enter the next world, he would have to pass a test. He would have to convince the gods in the hall of the double truth that he had been honest, had never harmed anyone, and so on. He made what was called the negative plea. I have not diverted the irrigation ditch. I have not killed anyone. I have not falsely adjusted the scale, and so on. To determine if he was telling the truth, his heart would be weighed on a balance scale against the feather of truth. This scene is shown in chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead. There were more than 150 chapters in the Book of the Dead. These were individual magical spells, each with a specific purpose. One might be intended to give the deceased power in his legs when he resurrected. Another could be for power of speech. Each chapter began with its title in red ink, followed by the actual spell in black. On one side of the balance scale, we see the deceased's heart. On the other, we have the feather of truth, ma'at. The idea is that if you've been a good person, a just person, the scale will balance. If that happens, the gods will declare you macharu, true of voice. The sickle is the ma biliteral, and we have an M phonetic complement. The abstract papyrus roll determinative is probably because you can't see truth. The second part begins with the phonetic complement for the or, cher, biliteral, followed by the u, quailchick. The determinative of the man with his hand to his mouth, it's because a voice is obviously something to do with speech. This phrase was so familiar to the ancient Egyptian that it became a euphemism for deceased, kind of like we say dearly departed. In texts, it was usually written in a very abbreviated form. The stature base is for the ma'ah, and the or was for the cheru, true of voice. As you can see from the vignette in chapter 125, Thoth, the god of writing, is watching over the weighing and recording of the result. What happened if your heart and the feather of truth didn't balance? Well, the Egyptians didn't have the concept of a hell. You simply went out of existence. That's the function of the composite creature near the scale, who's part hippo, part crocodile, part lion. He is the devourer of souls. If the scale doesn't balance, your heart is thrown to him, he eats it, and you go out of existence. I think that the Western icon of justice, the balance scale held by blind justice, comes directly from chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead. If you passed your test, you went to the next world. Here's the word for the next world. The star is another triliteral, dua. So the whole word was usually pronounced duat. The house determinative shows us it's a place. Another word for the next world was ement. The first hieroglyph is the emblem or standard of the West, and by itself, it's the ideogram for West. It was pronounced ement. The T shows us it's feminine, and the foreign land determinative shows us it's a place far away. The next world was always associated with the West, because the sun died in the West every day and was reborn in the East at dawn. Osiris, the god of the dead, was called Lord of the West. And another euphemism for those who were dead was Westerners. When someone died, people said, he went west. The Egyptians didn't like to talk about death. The death of a pharaoh is rarely recorded. We figure out when pharaohs died by when they stop being mentioned and when a successor starts to be mentioned. But there was a word for death and die, and it looked like this. Pronounced met, sometimes mewet, something like that, the determinative is a fallen man with blood coming out of his head. Add these words to your dictionary. We'll be using them when we begin to translate tomb inscriptions and funerary papyri. Some we'll see in our next lecture. Now I would like to discuss one more topic related to life after death as it was viewed in ancient Egypt. I'd like to talk about amulets and how they're really three-dimensional hieroglyphs. As you all know by now, ancient Egyptian art is unique, and there are several reasons for this. One is that there was no art for art's sake. As far as we know, no one ever had a painting on his wall just because it was beautiful. There are no Egyptian landscape paintings, no bucolic farm scenes, certainly no abstract paintings. Egyptian art always had a purpose. Either it was going to help you in this world, or would assist your transition to the next. Statues of the gods that were kept in temples were carved to give the god a place in which to dwell and to gain the god's favor. Often, when pharaohs built temples to the gods, they covered the outside walls with scenes of their glorious exploits in battle. It was good propaganda for the people, but it also told the gods what a great guy Pharaoh had been, so they would welcome it into the next world. Temple walls were art for eternity. This attitude towards eternity explains a lot. Think about what makes Egyptian art so strange. There's no realistic perspective. It's perfectly flat. But there's a good reason for this. They want to show all aspects of the human body so that they will be complete in the next world. So you have a frontal shoulders, as if you're looking straight at the person. The head is profile, as if seen from the side. Then the eye is frontal. It would take a lot of neck exercises to do that in real life. Another unique aspect of Egyptian art is that they don't want creativity in their art. If you needed a new statue of Amun, you got out the old one and had it copied. There was no word for artist in ancient Egypt. There were carvers, painters, craftsmen, but not artists. That's why Egyptian art was never signed. When a scene on a tomb was to be painted, first the wall was smoothed. Then a draftsman came and laid out a grid so that all the proportions would be exactly the same. If the head is 1 square, then the shoulders will be 3, the distance between the shoulder and the waist 4, and so on. It was practically paint by numbers. This is why hieroglyphs were so consistent. Writing hieroglyphs was practiced by drawing them within a square, so the vultures, feet, snakes, etc. would always have the same proportions. Within this rigid canon of proportions, though, there was still some room for craftsmen to show their stuff. They had some flexibility. They could compose tomb and temple scenes slightly differently, showing different details. Each tomb might have the same scene of the deceased hunting in the marshes. But the painter could select which birds to show and how to paint them. So there was some room for creativity, but the art was still functional. It was intended to show the gods how you hope to be treated in the next world. To a great extent, this functionality of art carried over to the art of jewelry making. Aesthetics was important. It had to be beautiful, but there was usually a purpose to it. In the realm of wearable art, this is clearest in amulets. The amulet is something small that's worn for protection. In modern times, the crucifix is one of the most common talismans, but there are many others, like the Star of David. Even the ancient Egyptian ankh is worn today by plenty of Egyptophiles. In ancient Egypt, amulets fell into 2 categories: funerary, those for the dead, and amulets for the living. But there was some overlap. Some amulets were placed on mummies, but also worn by the living. Let's look at funerary amulets first. Amulets were placed on mummies, and sometimes inside the body cavity itself, to assist the mummy in resurrecting. Often these amulets were no more than 3D hieroglyphs, saying what was desired. One of the most common of these amulets was the Deged pillar. As you remember from the myth of Isis and Osiris, Osiris was hacked into 14 pieces by his evil brother Set. But it all ended fairly well, with Isis reassembling her deceased husband and Osiris resurrecting in the west. The Deged hieroglyph, which represents the vertebral column of Osiris, became the symbol for stability. We see the hieroglyph over and over again in the popular prayer of Di Ankh Deged was Mire Deged. May you be given life, stability, prosperity, like Re, forever. Note that Re comes before the word like because of honorific placement. The god always comes first. Often, an entire necklace of Deged pillars would be strung across the chest of the mummy to ensure the deceased would have stability in the next world. Here's a pair of Deged pillar amulets. Usually, they would be made of faience, a ceramic similar to porcelain. These are carved out of bone. I think the idea was to give the amulets more potency by making the material similar to Osiris's backbone. By putting a string of these on the mummy, they literally said, stability, stability, stability. Another funerary amulet was the heart, also placed on the mummy. It protected the most crucial organ in the body. These heart amulets were usually carved out of either carnelian or red sandstone. I think the idea being that the closer to the real thing you can make the amulet, the more potent. So color was important. This one's gold, because gold was the color of immortality. When painting scenes on tomb and temple walls, there were color conventions that were closely adhered to. Egyptian painters didn't have a broad palette. They were working with mineral pigments, not mixing shades, so we see lots of primary colors. Often things that once grew were painted green, even if they weren't green. So a woven mat, our P hieroglyph, was painted green because the reeds from which it was woven once grew. Even Osiris, the god of resurrection and regeneration, was often painted green. So it's just a logical extension that the color of amulets was important. One amulet that was used only on mummies and always wrapped within the bandages was a headrest amulet. The ancient Egyptians slept with their heads on headrests, and in tomb paintings showing the servants bringing daily life objects for burial in the tomb, there's almost always a headrest depicted. There was even a spell in the Book of the Dead that was often inscribed on the amulet, intended to help the deceased raise his head in the next world. I think this amulet must have been extremely important. There were only 3 iron objects in Tutankhamun's tomb. One was a dagger blade, a second was an Eye of Horus amulet, and the third was his headrest amulet. Iron was very difficult to work, so anything of iron was very special. We've already seen scarabs and Eye of Horus amulets, and both were also used on mummies. One to ensure the deceased's continued existence, and the other for health in the next world. While many amulets protected both the dead and the living, some amulets were used only by the living. If you were pregnant, you might wear an amulet of Isis suckling her infant son Horus. Christianity later borrowed this iconography and transformed it into the Madonna and child motif. Osiris, Isis's husband, was the god of the dead, so you wouldn't wear an amulet of him. There was, however, another popular amulet for pregnant women, the goddess Taweret. She's a pregnant hippopotamus who has human breasts and stands on 2 feet. Her name is made up of 2 words, Ta, which means that, and Weret, which is great. Taweret means that great one. Hieroglyphs were an integral part of daily life for ancient Egyptians, even for those who were illiterate. All of these amulets were basically 3D hieroglyphs worn for protection. But for the more affluent, there were far more extensive versions of amulets. Next time, we'll look at examples of complex jewelry that both incorporated hieroglyphs into their designs and told stories. I'll see you next time.